time. So I don't think we have the whole thing in Vietnamese yet, but they are working on it. It's being done book by book. And let me say this too. I failed to mention this earlier. I just want to say I love your country, your heritage. I've only been to Vietnam twice. I was there in January, but I love your country, and I actually started a little Vietnamese church in Iowa many years ago. We didn't have many people. We only had about 10 or 15, but I loved them. And so I love Vietnamese food, and but anyway, I want to thank you, and I'm so excited. There's so many Vietnamese in this area. There's so many churches you can plant, so many disciples you can make, and it is my prayer that that happens. By the way, I think there are more motorcycles in Vietnam per person than anywhere in the world. Okay? I've never seen. Ernie, have you ever been to Vietnam? I've never seen anything like it. I've seen places with a lot of motorcycles, but I've never seen anything like, especially Ho Chi Minh City. It's just insane. Though I believe the priority is making disciples, the end result of making disciples who make disciples is churches spring up. See, I used to think Paul went to a city to start churches. I don't think now he did. I think he went there to tell people about Jesus and then disciple them. But when you make disciples who make disciples, they want to gather together. When they gather together, what you end up with is a church. So the church is the natural byproduct of making disciples who make disciples. And this is very important. I had it backwards. I used to think that the best way to make disciples was by planting churches. I've come to believe that the best way to plant churches is by making disciples. I think I had it backwards. Now, I do believe that the church should be a disciple-making factory. I believe, or if you want to use a greenhouse analogy, I believe the church should be a greenhouse growing disciple makers. Okay? But I believe the way you start the church is by making disciples who make disciples. When you do that, they want to gather together. And you end up with a church. Now, when I say you end up with a church, I'm not talking about a building. And I know you know there's a difference, but let me show you. When I was a child growing up, here in the States, and your buddy Rick pointed this out to us. Here in the States, here's what we would say. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the door. Here are the people. It was all about a building. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the door. Here are the people. Okay? And again, that's kind of an American mindset of what a church is. Thus, you got to have a building, which means you got to have a piece of property, which means you got to get a permit, and it means you got to build to code. And once you build it, you got to insure it. You got to furnish it, and you got to sit somewhere, and you got to have this, 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 and you got to have this. You got to have these, and you got to have that over there. By the way, I love your mirrors, beautiful mirrors. Okay, you don't have to have a mirror, but they are very nice mirrors. Okay, and you got to heat it, and you got to air condition it. You follow me?
Yes.
You know what you just did with the cost? That's why it's so expensive to plant churches. And then we go overseas and we do the same thing. And then the next pastor says, well, I got to have a property, and I got to have a building, and I got to have furnishings, and I got to have and everybody wants a microphone. They can have 10 people, but they still want a microphone. All right? You got to have a microphone to have a church. All right? So the cost goes like this. All right? We have found this, to the degree that you can lower the cost of church planting, it's pretty proportionate. You can speed up the potential to plant more churches. It's not rocket science. If it costs $100,000 to plant one church, then it's going to cost $200,000 to plant two churches, $300,000 to plant three churches. You hit a ceiling real quick. You run out of money. But if you can plant a church for $1,000, then you can plant two for $2,000, three for $3,000, four for $4,000. It's to the degree you do this with the cost, you do this with the rate. By the way, the same thing with the manpower. What we do is we send, what we typically do in the West is we send the best we have to Bible college and seminary. And so what we really do is we do this with the potential church planters. It's no wonder we plant so few churches. If we just train our lay people, we have a lot more lay people than we have pastors. So if you train your lay people, you're increasing the workforce. So if you do this with the workforce and do this with the cost, the ability to plant 1,000 churches, it's not that hard. Okay, it can be done. But the question comes up, what is a church? See, I think we use a lot of terms that we're not, I asked a moment ago, what is the work of the ministry? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Go back and look at it. I think you're going to conclude if you really look at it. If you look at the book of Acts, what they were focusing on was the Great Commission. That was the focus. That's what Paul had in mind, I believe, when he said that. So are we equipping our people to obey the Great Commission? But another good question to ask is, what is a church? If we're going to plant thousands of churches, I forget how many churches we concluded we need in Vietnam. I think it was, I want to say 80,000. Does that sound right? 80 or 90,000? I think that was the conclusion we came up with. What's that?
Just 1 or 2%.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You have 90 million people there? Yeah, so you have about 80 million or 88 million that aren't believers, something like that. So you divide that by 1,000, that's how many churches we need. I think it was about 80 or 90 million churches, or 80 or 90,000 churches. Well, doing it the way, spending 100,000 or 50,000, good luck on that.
Yeah.
But if you can get it down to $200 or $300 each, then you can do it. But anyway, another question to ask is, what is a church? What is a church? Well, here we had to come up with a working definition of a church. If we're going to plant churches, we need to know what it is we're planting. So here's the definition we came up with. And if you can accept this, you can plant churches all over this area. Now I'm going to use my hands. It helps you to remember if you use your hands. Okay, if you watch this a couple of times, you'll be able to do it too. We would say a church is a group of believers who gather together regularly. When they gather together, they worship the Father, study the Scriptures, pray, and fellowship together. From time to time, they observe the ordinances, and they are sent out to make disciples. And it's all done under the authority of the head of the church, Jesus Christ, and under the authority of his biblically qualified leaders. May I say it again? A church is a group of believers who gather together regularly. When they gather together, they worship the Father, study the Scriptures, pray, and fellowship together. From time to time, they observe the ordinances, and they are sent out to make disciples. And it's all done under the authority of the head of the church, Jesus Christ, and under the authority of his biblically qualified leaders. You say, where do you get that from? The book of Acts, primarily chapter 2, the last few verses, which was a description of the very first church on its very first day. Okay? That, we believe, is a solid biblical descriptive definition of the church. Now, if you can accept that, and I've shared that definition with denominational presidents, all kind of seminary professors, I've never had anybody refute it biblically. You can refute it culturally, but you cannot refute it biblically. It's very solid. It's based on Acts 2, 41 through 47. Now, if you can accept that as a solid biblical definition of the church, it not only tells you what the church is, it tells you what the church is not, because it leaves out a lot of stuff. There's nothing in that definition about a building, a salary, a degree, a day of the week, or a time of the day. Let's work through those. Do you have to have a building to have a church? Somebody answer me. Do you have to have a building to have a church? No. All right, now, everybody says no, but most of us don't really believe that, okay? I tell you who really doesn't believe that is pastors, because they will spend their whole life to get a building. And when they finally get it, they got to pay for it. And then they're like, why did I do this? Okay? And I'm speaking from experience. That's coming from a guy who's built a lot of buildings, okay? So, do we have to, we all know the church is people, it's not a building, right? I mean, you guys know, I don't have to tell y'all, this is not the church. What is this? Somebody tell me, what is this?
A wall.
It's a wall, yeah. It's not a church. What is this right here?
A door.
It's a door, yeah. What is this right here? It's the floor. It's not the church. So we know you don't have to have a building to have a church. If you go to Israel and visit, the guide is going to say, see that? That's where Jesus preached this sermon. That's where he taught here. And there's no building. There's just like a tree. Or maybe it's the lake and there's a little boat there. Okay? Jesus said it's my church, and Jesus didn't build any buildings. You don't have to have a building. Now, a building is a good tool. We're not opposed to buildings. And to be totally honest, every church planter we have, we don't build them buildings, we don't buy them buildings. They all would love to have buildings. And if I take you over with me, they're going to hope you're going to build them a building. Okay? And if you even act like you'll build them a building, they'll be so excited. Okay? They all want a building because we have buildings. And they're trying to be like us. But you don't have to have a building to have a church. Peter didn't have a building. Paul didn't have a building. Jesus didn't have a building. All right? There's nothing in the definition about a building. There's nothing in the definition about a salary. Now, pastors, don't get upset with me. I love salaries. Okay? I love them. And I believe the workman is worthy of his hire. I believe we should not muzzle the ox that treads out the corn. I believe that the man who works hard in preaching the word is worthy of double honor. Honorarium, same basic root word. I think it's right and biblical to pay those who are ministering to us in spiritual ways. I don't have any problem with that. However, I also understand that when it comes to church planting, the greatest church planter who ever lived was pretty much self-funded. Paul was a tent maker. In essence, he was a businessman. That's what he did. He made tents. You say, but other churches supported him. A few. Have you ever read Philippians? It only takes about 10 minutes to read the whole book. Read it today. Here's what Paul said in Philippians. He said, you were the only church that helped me. Now, this is talking about a particular period of his life. I think there probably were others, but at that point, he said, nobody else helped me. And then he said this. He said, you stopped helping me for a while. I think he went under the radar, disappeared. And then he said, I've resurfaced, and now you're helping me again. And he said, I want you to know that my God will now supply all your needs according to his riches and glory through Christ Jesus. He said, you've helped me, God is going to help you. But if you read between the lines, here's what he's saying. All those churches Paul started, all those people he helped, I would have thought they were standing in line waiting to help him. They were not. Pastors, are you listening? There's a lot of people that you think are going to help you. They're not going to help you. There are a lot of people that you're going to expect that they will, I mean, you led them to the Lord. You pointed them to Jesus, and they're not going to help you. They didn't help Paul. Paul said, I had to work with my own hands. I made tents. Did Paul plant churches? Yes or no?
Yes.
But he funded himself. You don't have to have a salary. Now watch. If you don't have to have a building and you don't have to have a salary, let me show you what you just did with the cost of church planting. You just brought it down to almost nothing. If you take out of your budget everything to do with buildings, everything, and everything to do with personnel, not a lot left. Okay? So what you've done is you've lowered the cost. Now you can go right back here. See, if I wanted to start 100 churches in this area, you know who I'd aim at? Lay people. I would train lay people to do this, to start this this, 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 this. And make sure it's all being done underneath this and this. You follow me? That's what I would do, because we don't need a building. They can just use their house. We don't have to pay a salary. They got a job, or they'll have to get a job. So you did this with the cost. Now you can do this with the number of churches you reproduce. So you don't have to have a building. You don't have to have a salary. There's nothing in the definition about a degree. I am not opposed to seminaries. We have right now, as I speak, over 500 training centers, schools all over the world. We're training right now, as I speak, 10,000 students. All right? Timothy's. I'm not opposed to schools. I've got a bachelor's degree. I've got a Master of Arts. I've got a Master, an MDiv, a Master of Divinity. I have a Doctor of Ministry, a DM. I'm not opposed to degrees. I have served on boards of seminaries. I teach in Bible colleges all the time. I think there's a need for Bible colleges. I think there's a great need for it. But let me remind you, the early apostles, according to Acts, were unlearned and ignorant men, but Acts says they had been with Jesus. We would say what qualifies you to do the work of the ministry is that you have been with Jesus. How many of y'all believe, do Vietnamese Christians believe that Jesus is God? Y'all believe that, don't you? Yeah, Jesus is God. So when you ask Jesus to come into your life, God the Holy Spirit came to live inside of you. God is inside of you. If that does not make you qualified, how in the world is studying this book going to make you qualified? This is just it's just paper with words on it. If God living inside of you does not qualify you, what will qualify you? Your laymen, your church members, they have God inside of them. Good night. I mean, what more do they need? Who more do they need? You see, in that definition about the church, there's nothing about a building. There's nothing about a salary. There's nothing about a degree. My guess is your people think I'm not qualified because I've not been to Bible college. I'm not qualified because I don't have all the answers. That's probably what they're thinking. What you've got to do is go back and tell them, wait a minute. The one who created everything out of nothing, the one that the angels worship and adore, the one who has all authority in heaven and on earth, he's living inside of you. And he has commanded you to make disciples. It's not that you can make disciples, it's that you're supposed to be making disciples. And he makes them qualified to do it. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Nothing in the definition about a building, a salary, a degree. What about a day of the week? Now, I am not an Adventist, okay? I got no problem with church on Sunday. But I have no problem with church on Tuesday or church on Thursday. The book of Acts says, daily in the temple and house to house, they never ceased teaching and preaching that Jesus was the Christ. They met every day. They met on Sunday, they met on Monday, they met on Tuesday, they met on Wednesday. You see, I think we can have church on Sunday morning at 10. I think we can have church Saturday night at 7. I think we can have church Tuesday afternoon at 2, Monday morning at 8. I think we can have it anywhere, anytime. Nothing in the Bible about a day of the week. The Acts was every day. See, I believe the psalmist said, this is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. If it's Sunday, so be it. If it's Monday, so be it. And then there's nothing in the Bible about a time of the day. There's no such thing as a holy hour. So here's what you just did. That box that we have church in, you just blew it to pieces. You can now have church anywhere, anytime. And you can train your lay people to go make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And when they do so, those new believers are going to gather together. And if they're doing this, from time to time, this, and they're being sent out to do this, as long as it's under the authority of Christ, and you're watching it, you're overseeing it, there's oversight. You're making sure it's being done biblically. As long as that's happening, you just started churches. And you did it without spending any money. You don't have to build buildings. You don't have to pay salaries. You don't have to send people off to expensive schools. You want to try to translate all of that? Is this a good place to...
With this model, you can speak for months without being tired. Qua phần mà mục sư và giáo sư của chúng ta mới vừa trình bày, thì ông cho chúng ta biết rằng là hội thánh là một cái sản phẩm tự nhiên của việc chúng ta đi ra môn đệ hóa. Tôi chưa từng nghe về cái câu nói nào giống như vậy. Bởi vì đối với mục sư David thì ông nói rằng khi chúng ta bắt đầu có những tín hữu ra đi làm chứng và môn đệ hóa tại nhà của họ, tại giờ của họ, sở làm của họ và công việc của họ, thì tự nhiên tức khắc chúng ta sẽ có một nhóm tín hữu khao khát cái sự thờ phượng chung, và tự nhiên chúng ta sẽ có hội thánh. Cái mục tiêu chính của hội thánh đầu tiên, và sứ đồ Phaolô cũng đã làm, cái focus là cái sự tập trung duy nhất của họ, đó là thực hiện đại mạng lệnh. Họ không làm việc gì khác ngoài việc thực hiện đại mạng lệnh của Chúa rõ ràng trong sách Công vụ. Như vậy thì cái câu hỏi mà chúng ta ngày hôm nay đang phải làm, đó là chúng ta làm gì và chúng ta định nghĩa hội thánh là như thế nào. Thì đối với David, ông cho biết rằng hội thánh là một cái nhóm người họ đến với nhau để thờ phượng Đức Chúa Trời, để cầu nguyện và để có cái sự thông công với nhau. Thỉnh thoảng họ sẽ giữ những cái thánh lễ để biết và nhớ về sự hy sinh của Chúa Giêsu, và họ ra đi để làm môn đệ hóa dưới cái thẩm quyền của Đức Chúa Giêsu Christ là đầu hội thánh. Và họ cũng là những người giám sát những cái môn đệ trong hội thánh của mình, make sure hoặc là bảo đảm rằng họ sẽ làm một cái công tác giống như vậy để tiếp tục phát triển môn đệ trong hội thánh của Chúa. Hội thánh là gì? Hội thánh là một cái mô hình mà nó không cần có cái 4 vách tường. Hội thánh cũng không cần phải có lương bổng đối với ông, bởi vì người hầu việc Chúa là người cũng có thể tự chu cấp và nhờ ơn Chúa để tìm một cái việc làm. Hoặc nếu không có việc làm thì hãy đi kiếm một cái việc làm để tự lo cho mình. Ông nói rằng sứ đồ Phaolô cũng là người đã tự lo cho mình rất là phần lớn. Ông làm trại, may trại và cũng có thể là người bán trại. Nhưng mà qua đời sống của ông thì ông đã hầu việc Chúa. Chỉ có duy nhất một hội thánh ở Ephesos là nơi mà ông nói rằng hội thánh là một cái người tài trợ duy nhất của ông trong cái giai đoạn của chức vụ đó. Và chúng ta thấy qua cái môi trường hầu việc Chúa đó, chúng ta hoàn toàn có sự tự do để hầu việc Chúa. Ông nói rằng nếu mà không có các cái bức tường, không có lương bổng thì cũng chẳng cần phải có những học vị cao. Mặc dù ông không phải là người chống đối lại vấn đề học trường Kinh Thánh hoặc là có học vị, bản thân ông cũng có rất là nhiều các học vị. Nhưng mà ông nói rằng điều duy nhất để khiến cho bạn có thể được qualify, có nghĩa là được xứng đáng để trở thành người hầu việc Chúa, đó là ở với Chúa Giêsu. Khi bạn ở với Chúa Giêsu, Ngài sẽ khiến bạn trở nên người được huấn luyện, và Ngài sẽ là người đấng có thể hướng dẫn bạn qua tất cả mọi sự khó khăn. Và một định nghĩa nhỏ nữa trong cái định nghĩa của hội thánh, đó là không phải bất cứ vào ngày nào của trong tuần hoặc là bất cứ giờ nào. Hội thánh có thể gặp bất cứ nơi nào, giờ nào để theo thuận tiện của nhu cầu của các tín hữu trong cái nhóm nhỏ đó.
Thank you. Let me show you a few pictures here. This, well, let me put it up here. This is a church. This is, see the guy in the chair on the right-hand side there? That's the Timothy. I've actually been to this one. See the wall there? It's an alley. We call it an alley church. There's another wall right on the other side of the picture. They strung some sheets up top to keep the sun off of them. That's just a businessman, just somebody's church member. He trained them how to lead his neighbors to the Lord, and he gathers with them. And let me show you. See this right here? That's their worship instrument. That's it. And their furniture is a couple of old beat-up chairs. That's pretty much it. I mean, that it doesn't. The alley doesn't cost. They don't charge you rent to meet in the alley. And the church planter is he has a job. That's it. That's a church. This is a church. Some of them get a little bit bigger. This is a church. They're sitting on somebody's front porch. The guy with his back to the wall, or the guy there on not the one on the left, but the next one facing us, he's the church planter. Just reached his neighbors. These are Hindus. This is a tree church in Africa. Just they meet under a tree.
Wow.
You could probably do that in California. We did it in Florida. We do it in Florida. You meet under a tree. Now, the overhead there is very low. There is no overhead. And he's got an old motorcycle. And see the one chair way over there? That's it. That's all they got. Can you have church that way? I think that's how Jesus did it.
Amen.
Thank you, Luis. I think that's how Jesus did it. Now see, if you got to build a big building, these people are in trouble. They don't have any money. And if some American comes over and builds it for them, then when the roof leaks, they're going to expect the American to fix the roof. And when the American doesn't fix the roof, they're going to say, well, why did you build us the building if you're not going to fix the roof? We don't have any money. What were you thinking? See, this guy, the big smile, layman, Paul, his pastor, trained him how to win. He led the entire village to Christ. Look at that humble. You say, that's not really a church. It's just a bunch of people sitting on the ground. Well, it depends on your definition of a church. What is a church? If you use the definition I just gave you, guess what that is right there? Somebody tell me, what is that?
Church.
It's a church, yeah. Here's a church in Uganda. The pastor and his wife were Muslims. We've got several hundred former Muslims that have now planted churches. And those are their new believers. A couple of years earlier, they were Muslims. Now look at that. And they built a little shed there that they meet in. That's a church. I've been in that one. This is a church in Nepal. By the way, do you see them on their knees, holding hands? See the fellowship? See the Timothy standing up? He's got a Bible in his hand. He's teaching the scriptures. They've been praying on their knees. What is a church? A group of people that gather together. They worship, study the scriptures, pray, fellowship. That's a church. This is a church in Pakistan. By the way, the explosion 2 weeks ago, Easter, in Lahore, that's what that's where we plant, Punjab province. I've been there. And thank God none of our team were killed, but we had some of our team had friends there that were killed in that blast. And that's a difficult place. It's in a brickyard. Here's another Pakistani church. These are churches. I could show you pictures all day. That's Myanmar, not too far from Vietnam. Going that direction. This is another Pakistani church. This would be just a typical area where we would plant churches right there. There we go. I think I got out of it. Yeah. So those are examples of churches. Now, if you can accept that definition that I've given you, those are churches. You say, well, I don't want to call them churches. Then call them what you want to call them. It is what it is. And if you want to call it a group, if you want to call it a house of prayer, that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But you can do that all over Southern California. You can do it. Listen, you can do that all day long. You can train your people to open their home and do that. All right, look back at 2 Timothy 2:2. 2 Timothy 2:2. There are two key truths in this verse to help you as you start making disciples, as you start planting churches. The first is mentoring. The second is multiplication. Mentoring and multiplication. Number one is mentoring. Number two is multiplication. Paul trained Timothy, who trained faithful people, who trained others also. Always ask questions when you read the Bible. Always ask who, what, when, where, why. Why is a good question to ask. And how. How is a good question to ask. The question I asked myself was how. Well, first of all, you got multiplication. You got 4 generations. Paul, Timothy, Faithful people, others also. Now everybody look up here for a second. 4 generations. 1, 2, 3, 4. How do you disciple somebody who'll disciple somebody who'll disciple? How do you do that? Well, you know, here in the States we have a saying. How do you eat an elephant? Somebody tell me, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. This is like the elephant. How do you do that? One bite at a time. One step at a time. See, the key in going from here to here, I believe, is from here to here. Say, David, I don't think I can do that. All right, but you can do this. Okay? How did Paul get from here to here? He started from here to here. He took Timothy and he discipled him. How did he disciple Timothy? All right, yes or no? Did Paul say, Timothy, I want you to enroll in the Baptist Bible College of Jerusalem? Is that what he did? Yes or no?
No.
No. Did Paul say, Timothy, I want you to enroll in TTI? Is that what he said?
No.
So you don't need TTI either, do you? No, you don't. Did he say, you must become like David, a converged missionary? Is that what he said? No, that's not a bad thing to be. But no, he didn't do it that way. Did he say, Timothy, we're going to have a 6-week discipleship course at church, 1 hour a week? Is that what he did?
No.
What about an 8-week?
No.
10 weeks? 12 weeks? He didn't do it that way, did he? All right, now, come on, did he? Yes or no?
No.
He didn't do it that way. How did Paul disciple Timothy? Here's how he discipled Timothy. He said, I want you to go with me on a trip to Turkey. They called it Asia. We'd call it Asia Minor. Today it's Turkey. Okay? And Timothy said, what are we going to do? And Paul said, we're going to make disciples. And Timothy said, well, what if they don't want to be made disciples? Paul said, there's no doubt. They won't want it. Most of them don't want it. And Timothy said, well, won't they get a little upset if we tell them they've been worshiping the wrong gods? And Paul said, oh, yeah, they're going to get upset. In fact, you will spend more time in jail than out of jail. And Timothy said, well, how are we going to get there? And Paul said, we will walk until we get to the coast, then we'll take a boat. Timothy said, I don't have any money. How are we going to get tickets for a boat? Paul said, well, I'm going to make tents. I know how to make tents. And I guess I'll hire you. You'll be my apprentice. We'll go as far as we can go. When we run out of money, we'll make tents. We'll sell the tents, and then we'll fund ourselves. And then Timothy said, well, what are we going to eat? Paul said, whatever we can find. Fish, berries. Maybe people will open their homes to us. And Timothy says, well, what if nobody opens their home? Paul says, then we'll fast. We'll fast and pray. That's what we'll do. Where are we going to sleep? They didn't have a DoubleTree. Or what'd you say, La Quinta? Okay. Next to Denny's? Is that what it means? Is that what you said it means? Okay. Okay. They didn't have those. They did have some inns, I guess. But Paul said, well, we'll sleep on the ground, or if somebody opens their home, we'll be gracious. And Timothy said, what's it going to cost, Paul? And I think Paul probably said, everything. By the way, what's a disciple? Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Follow me. If you follow me, I'll make you what? Fishers of men. See, we want it all laid out on a silver platter, don't we? That's not discipleship. So, Timothy said, my goodness, it's going to cost me everything? You mean I don't get to have a house in the suburbs, and I don't get to have a nice new car? It's going to cost me everything? It's going to cost you everything. And so Timothy said, well, let me pray about it. Let me pray about it. It's a evangelical way of saying, I got no plans of doing that. Okay? But no way am I going to do that. Let me pray about it. And I'm going to get counseling. And so Paul said, that's fine, young man, but I'll be here at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'm leaving, with or without you. If you want to go, show up. If you're not here, God bless you. I'm going anyway. Well, Timothy probably couldn't sleep very much that night, but the next morning at 6 a.m. he was there. Okay? And so Paul said, I'm glad you're here, son. Let's go. And they start walking down the road together, and Paul starts talking, and you know how old guys are. They just start teaching you. And he's got his arm around Timothy's shoulder, and he's instructing. Can you imagine spending hours every day with a guy like Paul? Just imagine what you'd learn. Good night. And Timothy must have just been, I got questions, and say that again, and I don't understand that, and what do you mean? And they just keep going back and forth, and they're talking, and it comes time for dinner, and they don't have any dinner, so Paul just gets on his knees, and he prays, and he thanks God, and then he goes to bed. And so Timothy gets on his knees, and he thanks God, and he lays down there and goes to bed. And the next morning, Timothy's awakened. He hears somebody over there. He looks over. Paul's about 100 yards away, and he's praising God and worshiping God. So Timothy gets up, and he goes over and gets on his knees next to Paul, and he starts praising God and worshiping God. Do you understand what I'm teaching you here? And they're walking down the road, and they're talking, and Timothy's asking questions, and here comes a man, and Paul says to Timothy, hold that thought. And he starts talking to the man about Jesus, and Timothy's just standing there just watching. He's not saying a word. And the next thing he knows, that man's on his knees praying and is crying, and he gets saved. And he gets up off of his knees and he says, oh, thank you, sir, thank you. I never knew that God loved me. I never knew that God had a son named Jesus and that he died on the... Nobody ever told me that. I didn't know that. By the way, a whole lot of your people in your country don't know that. Especially North Vietnam. They don't know that. He said, my wife lives right over the hill here. I live right over the hill here. My wife is there, and she's sick. I don't know how much longer she'll live. I've used all my money for doctors. They can't heal her. Would you come tell my wife about Jesus before she dies? Paul says, sure. Come on, Timothy. And they go over, and he lays his hand on that lady's head, and she gets saved, or she gets healed. I mean, Paul must not have been a Baptist because he healed people, okay? So he lays his hand on that lady, and she gets healed, and she's so excited. And Paul tells her about Jesus, and she gets saved. And Paul says, well, we got to go now. And they say, absolutely not. You're not going anywhere. And the mom jumps up, and she goes in the kitchen, begins preparing food. And they say, we must feed you, and you're going to stay here tonight. And we want all of our friends. We want the whole village to hear. And they bring all their friends together, and Paul teaches them about Jesus, and wham, a church springs up. That's Book of Acts. That's how they did it. They didn't put together a pre-launch team. I'm not opposed to pre-launch teams. In our culture, it's probably a good idea to do that. That's just not how they did it. You know what their weapons were? Prayer, obedience to the commands of Jesus, evangelism. Those were their weapons. That's how they did it. They stayed there a few days. They take off down the road again. And you know, you say, well, who led the church? Well, all I know is Paul appointed elders. You say, you can't do it that quick. I know it. But somehow he did it. I don't think you can do it that quick either, but he did it. Did you know some theologians think Paul was only in Thessalonica for about 2 or 3 weeks? And yet he left behind a church that Paul said, your reputation is known all over the world. How do you do that? That's just incredible. So they walk down the road, they take off again, and Paul's teaching Timothy, here comes another man. They do it, same thing happens again. Then here comes another one. Same thing happens again. Then here comes another one. This time Paul says, Timothy, this one's yours. Timothy says, no, not me. I don't know what to say. What if they ask me a question I don't have the answer for? And what if I say something wrong? And Paul says, I'm going to be right here by you. You just come on. You've been watching me do it. Now you do it. And Timothy thinks this is not going to work. This guy's not going to listen. I'm not Paul. The next thing he knows, the guy's getting saved and saying, my wife lives right over there. Can you come tell my wife? And by the time the sun goes down, Timothy is absolutely amazed. He didn't think he could be used of God. He's just a layman. He didn't go to Bible college. He's no Paul. But people are getting saved. Churches are springing up. Maybe Timothy was there when that young kid fell out the window. You know, Paul was preaching all night, and he fell down and broke his neck, and Paul raises him from the dead, and Timothy's like, how do you do that? I've never seen anything like this. Remember those demons that beat up the 7 sons of Sceva, stripped their clothes off, beat the living daylight? They went running out the house screaming and yelling, and those demons, as the men are running away, the demons shouted out, Jesus we know and Paul we know about, but who are you? And Timothy's standing there thinking, and even the demons of hell know about this guy. It's incredible. And maybe they were shipwrecked together. They're bobbing up and down in the Mediterranean just hoping some big fish doesn't swallow them. And Paul gets lashed with whips, and maybe they lashed Timothy too because he was with Paul. People threw rocks at Paul, and I'm sure they threw rocks at Timothy. In fact, maybe Timothy tried to shield Paul's body. Maybe the rocks hit him too. And they spent time in jail and out of jail, but everywhere they went, churches were springing up. It took 2 or 3 years to go on one of those trips. By the time Timothy got home, Paul had rubbed off on Timothy. Timothy had in essence become a little Paul, which is why he could now do the exact same thing with faithful people, who then became Paul themselves, who could then do the same thing with others also. That is the biblical way of making disciples. It's mentoring. Everything I just described. Is there teaching involved? Yes. I think all down the road. I think Timothy probably heard the book of Romans before Paul wrote it down. There was a lot of teaching, but it goes way beyond teaching. It's Jesus calling the 12 to be with him. Do you remember that passage in Luke? He spent all night in prayer, and then he called 12 to be with him. Read the next verse. It says Jesus went down the mountain, and the 12 went with him, and they never left him. They ate, they slept, they heard the sermons. He got them involved in ministry. Remember the 5,000? He said, go find me some food. So they won't go looking around. They come back. We got 5 loaves, we got 2 fish. Jesus said, sit them down in groups of what? 50. They had to then go out, that 5,000 men, that didn't count the women. That'd be like going to a Dodgers game or a Lakers game today. Be like going to a Lakers game. There's like 15, 20,000 people there. And they had to divide them into groups of 50. And 2 or 3 of those disciples were probably there's only 49 here and 52 there. So they had to get them in groups of 50. And remember Jesus said, roll the stone from the door so Lazarus can come out. They were involved in, remember Jesus sent them out by 2s to the different villages to preach it. He was giving them ministry experience as they went along. Okay? You put all of this together, you know what the word is for it? It's mentoring. It's a father-son relationship. It's relational. It's not teaching someone from a pulpit. That's how we try to do it. It's not having a professor that doesn't even know your name. It's a father-son relationship, which is why Paul called Timothy, my dear son in the faith. Paul came to see Timothy as his very own son, and Timothy saw Paul as his dad. And that is how you do it. We call that mentoring. If you get the mentoring down, you know what the result is? Multiplication. And that's what 2 Timothy 2:2 is teaching. Luis, I would say to you, that is how to start a bunch of Latino churches. It's finding Pauls, people like you, who will take a young man under his wing, or your wife will take a young lady under her wing and do what I just described. It's slow. Your buddy over there is going to start a church and he's going to grow to 300 or 400 while you're still messing with 1 or 2. But fast forward 30, 40 years down the road. The guys that do it your way, that way, you end up with a whole lot more people in the kingdom. Okay? Question?
Yeah, I know you're going to cover it later, but you mentioned Jesus' example and Paul's example, his trip with Timothy. they all take 2 or 3 years, and Jesus spent 3 years with his disciples. And that intensive 3 years, 24/7, basically. We don't have that relationship here. We have like once a week, maybe,
Yeah.
twice a week.
Yeah.
So multiply or span it out, maybe 6 years, 7 years,
Yeah.
okay? To make one disciple.
Yeah.
How many disciples can you make per session? Like
Yeah.
Jesus, 12?
Yeah.
Or one?
You have hit the nail on the head, my friend. See, our problem today, I don't know if you watch the little video, all the stuff we're having to do, and the time limits, and the guy's just he's just getting weighted down. I talk to pastors all the time, and some of them have said to me, one of them said to me this way. He said, David, he said, I agree with every word you've said. That is how they did it in the Bible. He said, but the problem is I don't have time to disciple my people. And I said, Pastor, think about what you just said. We don't have time to disciple. Our culture is so busy. It's so, which is why it's easier in some places in Asia today. Well, not just Asia, but a place like Nepal. It's tough in Japan. It's tough in Singapore. It'd be tough. Same kind of cultures, the busyness. All I can tell you is this. You're going to have to find 2 or 3 people. Maybe not one-on-one. Jesus was 1 on 12, okay? You can get 4, you can get 5, you can get 10. But you've got to focus on those who are willing to learn, who are willing to be mentored, who will do what you tell them to do. Okay? And you got to try to set your schedule to where you can squeeze every minute you can to spend with them. That's all I can tell you. I don't know. I don't think you're going to find the time you're going to want to find, but get as much time as you can. You look at what you're doing as a pastor or as a layperson, and if it's not helping you make disciples, try to get rid of it. Try to move it out of your schedule.
And the follow-up question is, when do you know that he's ready? I mean, you let him serve, you observe him, all that. When can you cut the ties and focus on a new disciple?
Well, I think the answer to the question is you never fully cut the tie totally. In other words, there never came a time where Timothy did not see Paul as his Paul. Okay? As far as a training, as far as you're meeting with them regularly, I think it's just a matter of when you can see that they are in turn discipling others. And by discipling others, let me go ahead and define discipleship, because that's important. Here's how we would define discipleship, and this is not original with me. I've never had an original thought. Okay? Everything I tell you, somebody taught me. All right? The best definition I've heard of a disciple is somebody who lives like Jesus while leading others to do the same thing. Living like Jesus and leading others to live like Jesus too. If you leave out that last phrase, you may make a disciple, but you won't make a disciple maker. Okay? You can train people to live like Jesus. But if they don't go out and lead others to do the same thing, then they may be a disciple in the sense that they're living like Jesus, but they're not making disciples. And I don't want our time, what this brother just said, our time is so limited. I mean, it's so limited. I don't want to spend my time investing in people that are not going to live like Jesus. And I don't even want to spend my time investing in people that are going to live like Jesus. I want to spend my time investing in people that are going to live like Jesus and teach others to do the same thing. The reproduction, the multiplication. So we would say the definition of a disciple is living like Jesus and teaching others to do the same thing. By the way, is that just philosophy? No, it's Bible. Turn to Matthew 28 real quick. Let me show you this, and then I'll let you come up, Andrew, and I don't know how you remember all this. Okay. Matthew 28, 16 and 17. It all starts with worship. Jesus resurrected. They saw him. Some of them doubted. Some of them didn't believe. But for the most part, they worshiped. It all starts with worship. That loving God. Loving God, loving people, great commandment. It all starts with loving God. They worship him. Verse 18, I'm going to paraphrase 18. I'm the big boss. I have the right to tell you what to do. That's really what it's saying. I'm the big boss. Heaven and earth. I have the right to tell you what to do. The word authority means the right to rule. I have the right to rule your life, to tell you what to do. Verse 19, therefore, since I have the right to tell you what to do, go make disciples. I'm sure you guys know the command there is not going, it's make disciples. And there are three participles there, going, baptizing, teaching them to obey. The way you make disciples is by going, that's evangelism. Literally, it's as you go. As you go to work, as you go to shop, as you go to play, as you go to study, as you go home to your neighborhood. You're evangelizing. You're trying to make disciples. It's evangelism. Discipleship begins with evangelism. It has to start with evangelism. All right? Those who get saved, you baptize them. Those who come up out of the water, read verse 20 for me. Who's got it open? You got it there, Luis or Ernie? Read verse 20.
Teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age.
All right, teaching who?
Them.
Teaching them. I don't know what it says in the Vietnamese Bible, but teaching, what does it mean, though? People. Teaching them. It means the same thing. Who is them?
The new disciples that have been made.
Bingo. Them is referring to the guy that just got baptized, came out of the water. And the guy that just got baptized is the guy that you went to and shared Jesus with. It's the brand new believer. Them, the person that you're supposed to teach to obey everything Jesus commanded, is them, the brand new believer. Okay? And by the way, what he had just commanded was to go make disciples. You know what we're supposed to be teaching the brand new Christian?
Make disciples.
To make disciples. You're not trying to make disciples. You're trying to make disciple makers. You're teaching them, the brand new believer, to go make disciples. You're trying to make, to me, the Great Commission is not really make disciples. If you throw verse 20 in there, it's make disciple makers. Okay? And that's what we're not doing real good at. Luis?
Indeed, Dr. Nelms, what we see in real converted people, sometimes you don't even have to tell them. They just get
They
it.
just do it. They get
They
it.
just get it.
Yeah.
If it is sincere conversion.
And that's the guy that I'm going to focus on. And so what you got